The dreaded backlog.
Hey there, Stick Drifters. This is Noah Rada, your favorite co-host of the hit podcast, Stick Drift. I'm here today to just kind of give a casual review and put my thoughts together on none other than Drakengard 3. So, Drakengard 3, I've struggled a lot to really form an opinion on it because I don't want anyone getting the wrong idea about the game. But at the same time, it's a game that for me was the right game at the right time. A time when I was really just not feeling gaming. I really didn't have much I was looking forward to in the gaming sphere, and I had just gotten a PlayStation 3 and was looking at games that are sort of exclusive to it, and I was like, hey, this game seems like it has kind of interesting artwork. It's Yoko Taro, and he makes cool stuff, so thought I'd give it a try. And the thing with it is, it's the type of game that when you boot it up, you understand exactly what you're in for. You boot up to get to the opening sequence of the entire game. Literally as soon as you boot up the game, you get the cutscene of the hook of the game. What is this game about, right? The opening movie. I don't know if that's what it's called, but we're gonna call it that. So the thing about it is, it's bizarre, as the best way I can put it. You get the classic, Zero, I have to go to the bathroom. And that's just, every time you launch the game, that's the first thing you're gonna hear. And I was like, I don't know, to me, it was just so bizarre. I was like, what is this game? What's going on with this game? What is happening here? This seems so unhinged. I've never seen anything like this in the AAA gaming sphere. So, and if it's, if it doesn't strike somebody as bizarre, then I don't know what games they're playing. But I'm not familiar with a game that works like that. And so, I kind of just went ahead and just gave it a shot, especially after seeing that opening cutscene. I'm like, well, I gotta give this game a run for its money. It hooked me with its opening movie, so, but I'm really glad I did, because the best way I can describe Drakengard 3, it's the type of game that I love that it exists. I love that it happened, but it's not something I would like to see ever again. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Part of it is just how crass the game can be. There's no walking around that. The game is extremely crass. If that's not your thing, this probably won't be the game for you. But if you can look past that, and there's a lot of looking past it, but the game is really interesting. I think that its unique story beats, its the way it tells its story, the pacing of the game, and just everything about the game is really unique. That's the best way to describe this game. It's not exactly I would call it a hidden gem, yes, but it's not. It's certainly not should never win a game of the year or anything, even though it did get my uh, game of the year for last year, but I'm probably the only one giving this game any sort of game of the years. But I gave my old game of the year, but it I I enjoyed it for what it was, and what it is a very technically unimpressive game that it brings together everything that I find in games to be interesting and throws in a lot of very unique things that I think no other game really does quite as well. And so, yeah, this review is just going to kind of talk about what I think are the important aspects of the game. Just help me unpack my feelings on the game. And yeah, if you're worried about spoilers, yeah, that's probably going to happen a bit in this review. I want it to be like a comprehensive review. So, but I will try to save any spoilers towards the end, and I'll say when I'm doing that, and then you just like skip some until I'm not doing spoiler things. So we'll try that. Yeah, cool. So, all right, we'll just take it from the top. So, Drakengard 3. Gameplay wise, it grew on me. I'm not a huge fan of like the sort of hack and slashy action games, but I found myself having fun quite a few times playing this game. It has some unique challenges as well in some of like the missions and things like that it gave me just the amount of like challenge, a mix of challenge and jank to overcome that I really enjoyed with the game. So I I think that the gameplay loop of going into missions and just fighting guys and fighting your way through stages, it was a lot of fun. The on rail portions of it were not that great. I mean, I like on rails games every now and then, but this one, it just felt a lot like those tornado sequences in Sonic Adventure. So take that as you will, but it's part of that era that still thought that you need a lot of different variety of gameplay styles, I think, and so they were just, and I don't know if it was a order from on high or if that's just what the vision was for the game, but either way, they're serviceable. The on rails is serviceable. It works fine, but it was definitely part of like the most disappointing features of the game, I guess. The game itself has its fair share of I guess inconsistencies with how it wants you to deal with problems as well. I found a few like major bosses difficult in a way that was cryptic, to where I had to kind of look it up online how to beat this thing, because like the in-game hints were pointing me in the wrong direction at times. So yeah, the game is it's very reminiscent of older games that just kind of give you the game and say, all right, figure it out. And that's fine, serviceable even, but I think if the game had a little bit more guidance in places, it would go a long way to a cohesive whole. But yeah, so gameplay wise, it's fine. It's fine. And the everything about the controls is like, it's a little finicky at times with the controls, but usually doing precise inputs wasn't too hard. The combos in the like the weapons, it's really about finding like a weapon style that you mesh with, and you kind of don't want to change around too much, because I found that higher leveled up weapons always felt better than like using the shiny new weapon that you just got that's level 1, because it had access to like longer combos and more options. So it's one of those games where you kind of want to stick with something for a while, and then once you get something else that looks interesting leveled up fully, you switch to that. But yeah, the weapon system was pretty fun to mess around with, though. The swords, the spears, the the fists, and the chakrams. All of them felt unique. Like most players, I'm sure didn't use chakrams a whole lot. They just don't really have a whole lot of use outside of ranged combat, which there's portions of the game that you're somewhat forced to use the chakrams, and that's fine. They're serviceable, but I think most of the bread and butter combat should be solved through a sword, and then the spear is fine for combat. It's a little slow and clunky, but I kind of liked it because it felt like it had a lot of weight behind it. The fists were kind of like a combo sort of weapon, so they were pretty fun to mess with from time to time, but for the most part I just found myself running around with the sword and was pleased with that. So yeah, and then there's also the intoner mode that Zero can go into, and it was a lot of fun to play around with that. I think one of the best mechanics around that, I like games that sort of let the weave the mechanics into the story, and the intoner mode does a really good job of that, because not only is it like Zero unleashing her sort of hidden intoner powers, we'll talk about that in a bit, but the enemy intoners that you face in the game will also use intoner mode when you use intoner mode in order to sort of counter that that battle boost. And so I find that really interesting, because that's like most of the time you can't be hurt in the intoner mode, but when the enemy uses their intoner mode, they kind of cancel each other out. And so it's really a really an interesting use of game mechanics for story mechanics. But that's about all I gotta say about the gameplay for now. It's not really the type of game that you play for the gameplay mechanics, in my opinion. Like, the gameplay mechanics are fine, but I think the real bread and butter of this game is the story, is the plot of it, the characters, the world building, and yeah, I guess I'll just talk about the plot. So, plot of it is angry, one-eyed Zero with the flower in her eye. Very cool design. I like it a lot. I think it's really interesting. But she's always angry, and she wants to kill chaos. No, she wants to... Sorry, wrong game. She wants to kill her sisters, the other intoners. So she just kind of runs around the world, killing lots of people and monsters, and killing her sisters. And I think I'll talk a little bit about the characters here, the intoners. I think I don't know if this is quite true, but I think that these characters are not exactly designed to be entirely liked. I think each of them have their own unique flaws and their own unique personalities, but I also think that they're a lot of ways they're very like cookie cutter sort of characters. There's not a lot of depth to a lot of the intoners. Obviously, Zero probably has the most depth as the main character, but even she can be like cookie cutter, angry, HD era hack and slash protagonist, and I also think that like 5 is just kind of dumb. 4 is 4 can kind of be a little bit interesting, I think. She's like, she has sort of like almost a split personality sort of thing going on. Not really split personality, but more like she's just naive enough to think that like killing is fine at times, and so it's an interesting like disconnect, I guess, from her like innocent goody two shoes personality. So yeah, I think that 4 might be the one of the most interesting ones, but she's still just like the innocent girl sort of personality that is typical of this like anime styled game. 3 is like the cryptic, like mysterious girl. Speaks in riddles. Ooh. Yeah, she's fine as a character. I think she's probably the most like, well, she's one of the most like tolerable, I think, of the Intoner sisters. 2 probably has like the most like normal personality. Later on, I won't get too deep into it because I said not like spoilers right now, but for like how you meet her, she's not doesn't really have much of a personality, kind of like an empty shell. So I'd say 2 is kind of just there, and then 1 is kind of like the like trying to be in control of things, sort of like the Deus Ex Machina sort of character, but she just, I don't know, I don't like her like design. I think that the like her haircut is kind of stupid looking. But she's a serviceable like final boss-ish character, I guess. But yeah, it's the Intoner sisters. I'll talk a little bit more on them later, but there's also the disciples of the sisters, and these are all male disciples. Each Intoner sister has one, except for 1 and 0, and 0 kind of just steals them, collects them like their Pokemon when she kills her sisters, so it's kind of interesting. But yeah, so there's let's see, there's the disciple of 5. Dito. He's like sort of a sadist, I guess. He's got a fine, let's say fine. He's interesting enough, I guess. Like the whole sadist thing is like, oh, interesting. It's I think he brushes against the party more so than any other party member, of like Zero's immediate disciples. So it's kind of interesting. I think he's probably one of the most interesting of the disciples, but he's still just like he can be a like whiny and complainy a bit in the game dialogue sometimes, and yeah. So and I'll talk about that a little bit more, the game dialogue in a bit, but yeah. And then there's a Dectus. He's probably my least favorite of these disciples. He's just masochist guy. He's like, I don't know. It can be funny sometimes, like his outbursts in the dialogue. Like he can do strange outbursts at like weird times. But for the most part, like his, I guess, one-sided or his one-note like personality trait of masochist is like it can get kind of old. And there's Octa. He's kind of a silly, goofy looking guy, and he's like a little freak. So he's kind of funny. He's always talking about his Pinor. And yeah, I mean, it's a interesting enough character, I guess. It's certainly nothing I've ever seen in game, but it's part of the, I guess, uniqueness of Drakengard 3 is the cast. I would say Octa would probably make it on a list of like the top most unique characters in the game. Like he would be the top, I think. He's got the most unique personality, for better or for worse. I would say most of the time for worse, because that's all he talks about. But is his Pinor. But yeah, he's fine. And then there's Scent. I think Scent would probably be like the least annoying of the disciples. He can come off as like an idiot, but I think he has like the most interesting character arc of any of the disciples. So and his personality's like his personality traits are probably the most muted of any of the disciples. So I think that the Scent is fairly interesting. But yeah, so that's like the main core cast. It's quite a tight knit cast, all things considered, and I think that really lends itself well to this sort of game. It's got that sort of I like to think of it like Kid Icarus Uprising. It's probably a weird sort of game to bring up, but they do this sort of thing where when you're in levels, the characters are like constantly talking to each other, and I find that to be charming. But yeah, and then yeah, I should probably talk about the titular dragon of the game as well when I'm talking about characters. So I'll talk about Mikhail. He's kind of your sidekick throughout the journey. He's Zero's dragon. He's really a fun character. He really I guess sticks out like a sore thumb in this cast, and that makes him more interesting, I think. In a cast of like a lot of oddballs, he's just like this big dumb dragon that really doesn't understand what's going on at all. He's just there because he's Zero's dragon, and so I think that makes him a pretty interesting addition. So yeah, I like Mikhail as a character quite a bit. I think his character growth is probably the most significant of the cast, besides probably Zero. Zero and Mikhail probably have the most interesting development, but especially Mikhail. So, but yeah, that's the main cast of the game. I think so the main I guess world building sort of piece is that it's kind of a post swords and magic, but like really high level magic, to the point of like almost like post scientific. They've got like ruined cityscapes and things like that in the world, and so it's like they had an advanced age, and then that age was ended. And then the intoners sort of appear, and that's like the main, I guess, goddesses of this world is the intoners. And so yeah, there's like a big disaster that happens in the past of the game, and then the intoners appear and sort of like unite the world, and then we pick up with Zero, like, hey, these intoner things are too powerful, so let's go ahead and kill him. So that's kind of Zero's whole shtick. She needs to kill her sisters to sort of bring balance back to the world, not have just these goddesses ruling from on high. So yeah, so that's it's pretty much the basics of the characters, the story, and the world building. I'd say that the way that they present the story, though, is really well paced. They do it a lot in game when you're just like mashing buttons, because the gameplay usually is not that thought provoking. So it gives you sort of something to do when you're mashing buttons, is listening to the dialogue. So, and the dialogue is, like I've said, it's a mixed bag, because depending on the character that's talking, it can have any sort of range of topics. But there's always things that just are said out of left field. And you're like, wait a second, did they really just say that? Like, are they allowed to say that? Like, so it's so just interesting and unique, I guess. So yeah, I think that the most interesting part of this game is the characters, but there's a lot you have to get through to really be able to appreciate this game. There's a lot you have to overlook, I guess, because the graphics are great. PS3, I think this was a late PS3 release too, so I think that it benefits well from the PS3 sort of having had enough time to develop it. People have had enough time to develop it by the time this game came out. So, but the sound design it always leaves something to be desired. The music itself is great. There's a lot of nice tracks. A lot of nice what's the word? I think they even have a few of those tracks that like have like the faux language, like in the later Nier games. Can't think of any off the top of my head, but the music's fine. But the actual like ambient sound and just like the mixing of audio can be really clashing sometimes. I've found myself a lot of times while playing the game like turning the volume of my TV like way down and way up, because either the game was way too loud or I couldn't hear what's going on. And so the sound mixing was all over the place. There wasn't options to sort of mix the sound yourself, at least that I could find. And so you're kind of just stuck with like audio levels being all over the place. And so that can be a bit off-putting for people. But you get through that, and the voice acting is actually pretty interesting. I played it in English. There's a purchasable option for Japanese, which is I think that was probably the standard at the time, was not having Japanese, and so they wanted to like give the option for Japanese voice options, but because a lot of like localizations would just take those away in the past. But I don't like that decision to sort of put a paywall behind a language, but it's there, I guess, so that's better than nothing. But yeah, I think that the sound design could have used some fine-tuning, but the real I guess big issues with the game, the elephant in the room, is the game is really poorly optimized. It has a lot of issues with slowdown. I noticed it more towards the beginning of the game. I'm not sure if it got better or if I just ended up getting used to the slowdown. I genuinely don't know, but it does have that's a common thing in the HD era, PS3, X360, those sort of that era of games had a lot of issues like that. Heck, even Dark Souls had its own fair share of those sort of optimization issues. So, but it seemed a lot more consistent of issues in this game, and so it's hard to look past. There's just like times where the game will just like be a little bit buggy. I never encountered any like fully game breaking glitch. I had one glitch happen where like there was a portion of like a HUD element burned into the game screen. Like whenever I would like go and select like go into missions and things, like it would just be burned into the game screen. It was the oddest thing, but that was just solved by like restarting the game. So it was one of the weirder glitches I had, but like it wasn't really like quote unquote game breaking. I just had to like restart the game, but it was definitely unplayable with that visual element blocking the game screen. But yeah, other than that, other than like the sound design issues and the optimization issues, the game is it's a fine game in all respects, and I think that more people should give it a chance. It takes some getting used to. You got to give it its got to give it the early game. I think it really picks up after beating 5, and the further you get in, the more I think the game really opens up, and you really feel the unique experience and the unique I guess conversations of the characters. Like the game, the story beats come out swinging. Like that opening movie, like that's what you're gonna expect from most story beats of the game. Like they do some bizarre things in the game. That is for certain. Especially in the cutscenes, like they'll just say the most outlandish things, or like do like the most like cartoonish possible thing in a cutscene, and you're like, are they really doing this? Like, is this really happening? And so it's so unique that I really, if somebody's looking for like an experience that they've never had, I think there's no better place to look than Drakengard 3 if you want something unique. But yeah, so I think I'll move on into sort of spoilerish territory. So I'll talk a bit about that, and then actually I think I'll give my full sort of opinion on it first, and then I'll go into spoiler territory, and that way you can stop watching this if you don't want to be spoiled. So to sort of give my full opinion on the game, I think you should play it. I think you should give it a try, and if you're not feeling it, then that's fine, but it really surprised me how much I enjoyed this game. It was the right game for me at the right time, and you couldn't ask for more. It has its fair share of issues, and I don't want to oversell the game, but I enjoyed it, and I think more people should experience it and try and enjoy it. All right. So, into spoiler territory. So the twist of the game, the big twist, I guess, is that all of the intoners are Zero. Zero gets infected by the flower, and the main crux of the game is that she wants to destroy the flower that makes her and the I guess the clones of her, parts of herself, are she wants to kill them as well, and that is why she ends up teaming up with her previous dragon, Michael, because he is a longtime enemy of the flowers. And so she wants to kill the flower. He's kind of sworn to kill the flower, and so they kind of just work together to set out and kill all the intoners. But yeah, early on in the game, he dies, and like during the prologue, and becomes Mikhail. He's reincarnated, and so it's interesting. Yeah, I think that one of the parts of the game that really was the most disconnect for me, story wise, that I didn't appreciate was that whenever you would beat a route of the game, you would keep all of your disciples from, like, even if they wouldn't have really been part of your party at that point. I didn't really understand that. Maybe it was because of timey-wimey schwimey things that Cord was doing. I don't really get it, but they just were sort of there at like wrong times in the story, and I don't know. I didn't appreciate that. I think it lost a little bit of cohesiveness and became a little bit less interesting when it stopped obeying rules like timeline of like acquiring disciples. So, but it did have some interesting twists that they were able to pull off because they had all of the disciples for the rest of the sort of alternate routes. So, and the interactions with the disciples are a big part of the game. So I can see why they wouldn't want to limit those, I guess, story-wise, but I guess mechanics of the story, it's a little bit of a fail. But yeah, I think that some of the like better route twists are when you fight two, and Seal sort of like joins her. It was pretty interesting. Same thing when you fight like zombified 5 and Dito sort of joins her. That's pretty interesting. Yeah, so the routes have some interesting moments, but I guess the biggest kick in the pants is that final boss, to where you're essentially doing a rhythm game on a very very unoptimized engine for a rhythm game, and you're doing it blind. I like rhythm games quite a bit, but it just did not feel like I wasn't enjoying it after numerous attempts. After hours of attempts, I just was not enjoying it anymore. So I decided that I had experienced enough of the game, and I put it down. I didn't bother beating the final boss, but I think it's a really interesting set piece. I really do. I love the music of the final boss. It's probably the best track of the game, but I don't think that it's a type of final boss that should happen again in games. I think it's a one and done sort of thing, even though they did it like 3 times for what I understand, because they did it in the other 2 Drakengard games, I think. But yeah, it's kind of a troll. I think it's meant to be a troll, but it's still an interesting troll at that. So I think that the story and the ending wraps up neatly with the Accord stuff, and it's interesting enough. I think that I would like to see something else in this Drakengard universe. I'd like to see a prequel, personally. I think that would be interesting, going back to like the first partner for Michael that they talk about in his sort of backstory. I think that would be interesting to see the world of Drakengard like before the big apocalyptic situation that leads to the world of it being as it is. But yeah, so it's a cool game. I guess I'll talk briefly about the DLC. The 5 DLC is kind of funny at times, but it's still kind of worthless. The 4 DLC really fleshes out her character, but it's still just kind of there. It's not too interesting. It was serviceable. I thought it was fine. The 3 DLC, I think mechanics wise, I enjoyed it the most. Like the missions themselves, gameplay wise, it was probably the most interesting. But 3 as a character just isn't really interesting, even in her sort of prologue. So, yeah, the story wise, it was one of the least interesting. But the 2 prologue was super interesting. I really enjoyed. It definitely made her one of my favorite intoners. She's definitely the most normal intoner before she sort of goes crazy from the events of her prologue. But the interactions of her and Cell are pretty interesting. So, and then the 1 prologue, I don't really like 1, so it was serviceable, but not really that interesting. Then the 0 prologue is really important to understanding, like the dragons and why Zero and Michael are fighting together and things like that. It's a really interesting backstory to Zero that I think it's pretty important for understanding pieces of the game. So yeah, it was fun to play through as well. So, but yeah, that's about all I got to say about Drakengard 3. So thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more Stick Drift.